Question 1. Benchmark analysis indicates that an organization is migrating its critical applications to a VMware NSX X environment and needs to implement a robust network security strategy. The primary objectives are to enhance security posture, ensure compliance with data protection regulations, and maintain operational efficiency. The organization has a complex, multi-tier application architecture with varying levels of data sensitivity. Which of the following approaches best aligns with these objectives when designing the NSXT security architecture? Option A. Deploy NSXT with minimal firewall configuration, relying on the existing physical network security controls and assuming that the virtualization layer does not introduce new security risks. Option B. Implement a complex and highly customized set of firewall rules across various NSXT components without a clear overarching strategy, prioritizing flexibility over standardization and manageability. Option C. Implement a comprehensive microsegmentation strategy using distributed firewall rules to enforce granular security policies at the workload level, combined with logical network segmentation and appropriate gateway firewall services for perimeter defense. Option D. Focus primarily on strengthening the perimeter firewall and implementing broad network access control lists, ACL, at the edge of the data center, assuming internal threats are less likely. The correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive microsegmentation strategy using distributed firewall rules to enforce granular security policies at the workload level, combined with logical network segmentation and appropriate gateway firewall services for perimeter defense. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in network security architecture, balancing the need for granular traffic control and segmentation with the operational overhead and potential for misconfiguration. The professional must consider the implications of different NSXT deployment models on security posture, compliance, and manageability. The core of the challenge lies in selecting a strategy that aligns with the organization's risk appetite. Regulatory requirements, which for this exam are assumed to be within a general framework of data protection and network security best practices, without specific jurisdictional mandates beyond the exam scope, and operational capabilities. The correct approach emphasizes a layered security model, leveraging NSXT's microsegmentation capabilities to enforce the principle of least privilege at the workload level. This aligns with modern security paradigms that assume breaches can occur and focus on containing their impact. By isolating workloads and defining strict ingress and egress rules, the organization significantly reduces the attack surface and limits lateral movement. This strategy is best professional practice because it directly addresses potential security vulnerabilities, enhances compliance by providing auditable control over traffic flows, and supports a more resilient infrastructure. It allows for dynamic policy enforcement that scales with the environment, a key benefit of NSXT. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on perimeter security. This fails to account for insider threats or compromised credentials that bypass the perimeter. It also neglects the need for granular control within the data center, which is often a requirement for compliance frameworks that mandate data segregation. Another incorrect approach would be to implement overly broad firewall rules, which, while seemingly simpler, defeats the purpose of microsegmentation and increases the risk of unintended access or policy bypass. This is a failure of due diligence in security design. A third incorrect approach might involve a complex ad hoc rule set that is difficult to manage and audit, leading to increased operational risk and potential for misconfiguration, which can have significant security and compliance implications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the organization's security objectives and compliance obligations. This involves assessing the threat landscape, identifying critical assets, and evaluating the capabilities of the chosen technology, NSXT. The framework should then involve evaluating different architectural options against these requirements, considering factors such as security effectiveness, operational complexity, scalability, and cost. A proof of concept or pilot deployment is often advisable to validate the chosen approach before full-scale implementation. Regular review and auditing of security policies are also crucial components of this framework. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new advanced threat detection solution for VMware NSX X offers significant potential for identifying sophisticated attacks, but its integration appears complex, Which approach best balances the need for enhanced security with operational feasibility and risk mitigation? Option A. Rely solely on the vendor's case studies and marketing materials to confirm its capabilities and proceed with a phased rollout based on their recommendations. Option B. Reject the solution outright due to its perceived complexity, opting to maintain the current security posture. Option C. Immediately deploy the solution to a production environment to gain immediate visibility into potential threats. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive proof of concept POC in a dedicated lab environment to validate its effectiveness, assess integration challenges, and measure performance impact before a full rollout. The correct answer is C. Immediately deploy the solution to a production environment to gain immediate visibility into potential threats. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security architecture, balancing the immediate need for enhanced threat detection with the long-term implications of technology adoption and operational overhead. Professional challenge lies in evaluating the efficacy and suitability of a new security control within the existing VMware NSX 4X environment, considering not just its technical capabilities, but also its integration complexity, resource demands, and potential impact on network performance and management. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen solution aligns with organizational security policies, compliance requirements, and operational realities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a phased, evidence-based evaluation that aligns with the principles of responsible technology deployment. By conducting a proof of concept, POC, in a controlled lab environment, the team can validate the solution's effectiveness against specific threat vectors relevant to their organization without risking production disruption. This allows for a thorough assessment of integration challenges, performance impacts, and the identification of necessary training or process adjustments. This methodical approach minimizes risk and ensures that the final decision is informed by practical experience, thereby adhering to best practices in IT governance and security management. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the vendor's marketing claims without independent validation fails to uphold professional due diligence. This could lead to the adoption of a solution that is either ineffective against actual threats or introduces unforeseen operational burdens, potentially violating organizational policies on risk management and resource allocation. Another incorrect approach that immediately deploys the solution to production without adequate testing risks significant service disruption and security vulnerabilities if the solution proves incompatible or unstable. This disregards the fundamental principle of change management and could lead to regulatory noncompliance if the disruption impacts critical business functions or data security. A third incorrect approach that dismisses the solution based on initial perceived complexity without exploring potential mitigation strategies or vendor support overlooks opportunities for innovation and improvement, potentially leaving the organization exposed to evolving threats. This demonstrates a lack of proactive problem-solving and a failure to fully explore all viable options. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that includes defining the problem and objectives, identifying potential solutions, evaluating each solution against defined criteria, technical fit, cost, risk, operational impact, compliance, conducting pilot testing or post-CS for high-impact solutions, and finally, making an informed decision based on the comprehensive evaluation. This iterative process ensures that decisions are data-driven, risk-aware, and aligned with strategic goals. Question 3. The audit findings indicate a potential misconfiguration in the NSX distributed firewall (DFW) rule set that may be inadvertently allowing broader network access than intended for a critical application tier. Which of the following approaches best addresses this finding from an impact assessment perspective? Option A. Immediately disable the DFW rule to prevent any potential unauthorized access, and then investigate the rule's intended purpose at a later time. Option B. Revert the DFW rule to a previous known good configuration without further analysis, assuming the previous configuration was secure. Option C. Conduct a detailed analysis of the specific DFW rule in question, examining its source, destination, service, and action parameters, and correlate this with the application's documented network requirements and security policies to determine the actual scope of exposure. Option D. Rely on network traffic logs from other security devices to infer the impact of the DFW rule, as direct analysis of the NSX DFW configuration is too complex. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed analysis of the specific DFW rule in question, examining its source, destination, service, and action parameters, and correlate this with the application's documented network requirements and security policies to determine the actual scope of exposure. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential misconfiguration within the VMware NSX4X environment that could impact the confidentiality and integrity of network traffic. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a deep understanding of NSX security features, their interdependencies, and the potential ripple effects of misconfigurations. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the impact of a specific configuration issue without causing further disruption or overlooking other critical vulnerabilities. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for immediate remediation with the imperative to maintain service availability and data security. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic and evidence-based assessment of the identified issue. By leveraging NSX's built-in diagnostic tools and correlating findings with established security best practices and relevant regulatory frameworks, assuming a U.S. regulatory context for this exam, such as NIST guidelines or specific industry standards like PCI DSS if applicable, a precise impact can be determined. This methodical approach ensures that remediation efforts are targeted, effective, and aligned with compliance requirements, thereby minimizing risk to the organization. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reverting the configuration without understanding the root cause or potential downstream effects is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the reintroduction of the original vulnerability or the creation of new security gaps. Another incorrect approach, which involves disabling the affected feature entirely without a proper risk assessment, fails to meet the principle of least privilege and could compromise legitimate business functions, leading to operational and compliance failures. Furthermore, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or assumptions rather than technical validation ignores the professional obligation to base decisions on verifiable data and established security principles, potentially leading to a false sense of security or unnecessary system downtime. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the technology, the business context, and the regulatory landscape. This involves 1. Clearly defining the problem and its potential scope, 2. Gathering all relevant technical data and audit evidence, 3. Consulting official documentation and established security frameworks, 4. Performing a risk assessment that considers both technical and business impacts, 5. Developing and evaluating multiple remediation options, and 6. Implementing the chosen solution with rigorous testing and validation, followed by ongoing monitoring. Question 4. Strategic planning requires a thorough evaluation of how the adoption of VMware NSX4X for network modernization will affect the organization's adherence to its established security policies and regulatory obligations. Which of the following actions best supports this strategic planning requirement? Option A. Rely on the default security configurations provided by VMware NSX4X, assuming they inherently meet all organizational security policies and regulatory requirements without further validation. Option B. Focus the impact assessment solely on the technical performance benefits of NSX4X, deferring any consideration of security or compliance until after the initial operational stabilization phase. Option C. Prioritize the deployment of NSX4X based on its potential to improve network agility and operational efficiency, with security and compliance reviews conducted as a post-implementation activity. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive impact assessment that specifically analyzes the security controls, data protection mechanisms, and audit logging capabilities of NSX4X in relation to existing security frameworks and relevant regulatory mandates. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the deployment of NSX4X based on its potential to improve network agility and operational efficiency, with security and compliance reviews conducted as a post-implementation activity. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in network modernization projects where the impact of significant architectural changes on existing security postures and compliance requirements needs thorough evaluation. The professional challenge lies in balancing the benefits of a new technology, VMware NSX4 X, with the imperative to maintain regulatory adherence and a robust security framework. A hasty or incomplete impact assessment can lead to unforeseen vulnerabilities, compliance breaches, and operational disruptions, all of which carry significant financial and reputational risks. The correct approach, conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that meticulously analyzes the security and compliance implications of NSX4 X deployment, represents best professional practice. This involves a systematic review of how NSX4 X features, such as microsegmentation, distributed firewalling, and network virtualization, interact with existing security controls and regulatory mandates. For example, understanding how NSX4 X's policy-driven security model aligns with or necessitates adjustments to existing access control policies, data protection requirements e.g. GDPR, HIPAA if applicable to the jurisdiction, and audit logging standards is crucial. This proactive evaluation ensures that the modernization effort enhances, rather than compromises, the organization's security posture and regulatory standing. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with deployment based solely on performance or operational efficiency gains without a dedicated security and compliance review. This overlooks the critical regulatory requirement to ensure that all IT systems and processes are designed and operated in a manner that protects sensitive data and adheres to applicable laws and standards. For instance, failing to assess how NSX4 X's network segmentation capabilities might affect data flow for compliance reporting, or how its logging mechanisms integrate with existing security information and event management systems could lead to non-compliance with audit trail requirements. Another failure would be to assume that NSX4 X's inherent security features automatically satisfy all regulatory obligations without specific validation against the organization's unique compliance landscape. This assumption is a direct contravention of the principle of due diligence in regulatory compliance. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a phased approach to technology adoption. First, clearly define the project's objectives, including both technical and compliance goals. Second, engage stakeholders from security, compliance, and operations teams early in the planning phase. Third, conduct a detailed impact assessment, leveraging vendor documentation, industry best practices, and, if applicable, specific regulatory guidance relevant to the jurisdiction. Fourth, develop a remediation plan for any identified gaps or risks. Finally, implement and continuously monitor the deployed solution to ensure ongoing compliance and security effectiveness. This structured decision-making process mitigates risks and ensures that technological advancements are aligned with overarching business and regulatory imperatives. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that the network security team proposes a significant network segmentation initiative using VMware NSX4 X to enhance security posture. However, the team has not yet conducted a detailed analysis of how this segmentation might affect the performance, availability, and data access of existing business-critical applications. Which of the following approaches best addresses this oversight and ensures a responsible implementation? Option A. Proceed with the segmentation as planned, assuming that any application issues can be addressed reactively post-implementation, as the security benefits are paramount. Option B. Conduct a phased impact assessment, prioritizing critical applications and services, involving application owners and stakeholders to identify potential conflicts, and developing mitigation and rollback plans before proceeding with each phase of the segmentation. Option C. Delegate the impact assessment to the application development teams, assuming they have the best understanding of their applications and can manage any resulting issues independently. Option D. Immediately halt the segmentation project and indefinitely postpone any further security enhancements until a perfect, all-encompassing impact assessment can be completed, which may take an extended period. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the segmentation as planned, assuming that any application issues can be addressed reactively post-implementation, as the security benefits are paramount. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security operations. balancing the need for robust security controls with the operational realities of a dynamic IT environment. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the potential impact of a proposed network segmentation strategy on existing business-critical applications and services. Without a thorough impact assessment, the implementation could lead to unintended service disruptions, data access issues, or performance degradation, all of which have significant business and potentially regulatory implications. The correct approach, which involves a comprehensive impact assessment, represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of responsible IT governance and risk management. By systematically identifying all affected systems, applications, and user groups, and by quantifying the potential consequences of the proposed changes, the IT team can make informed decisions. This proactive approach allows for the development of mitigation strategies, contingency plans, and phased rollouts, minimizing the risk of negative outcomes. This aligns with the general principles of IT security and operational resilience expected in professional practice, ensuring that security enhancements do not inadvertently compromise business continuity. An incorrect approach that bypasses a formal impact assessment is professionally unacceptable due to several regulatory and ethical failures. Firstly, it demonstrates a disregard for due diligence and a failure to adequately manage risk, which can be implicitly or explicitly required by IT governance frameworks and best practices. This could lead to breaches of service-level agreements, SLAs, with internal or external stakeholders, potentially resulting in financial penalties or reputational damage. Secondly, it risks violating data privacy and security regulations if the segmentation inadvertently exposes sensitive data or disrupts access controls, leading to noncompliance. Ethically, it represents a failure to act in the best interest of the organization and its users by prioritizing speed over thoroughness and potentially causing harm. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on technical feasibility without considering business implications, fails to recognize that its infrastructure exists to support business objectives. This narrow focus can lead to technically sound but operationally disastrous implementations. It ignores the interconnectedness of IT systems and business processes, a fundamental aspect of professional IT management. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a structured risk assessment methodology. This begins with clearly defining the scope of the proposed change. Next, identify all potential impacts across technical, operational, and business domains. Quantify the likelihood and severity of these impacts. Develop mitigation strategies for identified risks and contingency plans for residual risks. Finally, obtain stakeholder buy-in and approval based on the comprehensive assessment before proceeding with implementation. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, risk-informed, and aligned with organizational goals. Question 6. Process analysis reveals a critical security vulnerability has been identified in a core VMware NSX X network function, with active exploitation reported in the wild. The vendor has released a patch, but it has not yet undergone extensive third-party validation for broad compatibility. The IT security team is under pressure to remediate this risk immediately. Which of the following remediation strategies represents the most professionally sound and risk-averse approach? Option A. Deploy the vendor-provided patch to a staging environment that mirrors production, conduct thorough testing of critical network services and applications, and then proceed with a phased rollout to production based on successful testing outcomes. Option B. Immediately deploy the vendor-provided patch to all production NSX X components to ensure the fastest possible mitigation of the vulnerability. Option C. Rely on existing firewall rules and intrusion prevention systems to detect and block exploitation attempts, and defer patching until the next scheduled maintenance window. Option D. Revert to a previous, stable version of NSX X that is known to be free of this specific vulnerability, and postpone patching until a more thoroughly validated update is available. The correct answer is A. Deploy the vendor-provided patch to a staging environment that mirrors production, conduct thorough testing of critical network services and applications, and then proceed with a phased rollout to production based on successful testing outcomes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security where a critical vulnerability is discovered in a widely deployed network function. The professional must balance the immediate need for security with the operational impact of implementing a fix. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate remediation strategy that minimizes risk to the business while adhering to established security policies and vendor recommendations, all within the context of the VMware NSX4. Professional exams implied regulatory framework, which, for this exam, is assumed to be aligned with general IT best practices and vendor guidelines, as no specific jurisdiction is provided for this question. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased rollout of the patch, starting with a non-production environment. This aligns with best practices for change management and risk mitigation. It allows for thorough testing of the patch's efficacy and its impact on existing network configurations and applications before it affects the production environment. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of service disruption and ensures that the security posture is enhanced without introducing new vulnerabilities or operational issues. This is professionally sound as it demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to stable, secure operations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing the patch immediately across all production environments without prior testing is a direct violation of sound change management principle. It introduces a high risk of widespread service outages, data corruption, or application failures, which could have significant business and reputational consequences. This approach fails to demonstrate due diligence and a responsible approach to network security remediation. Rolling back to a previous, known vulnerable version of the NSX software is not a viable long-term solution. While it might temporarily mitigate the immediate exploit, it leaves the network exposed to the same vulnerability. This is professionally irresponsible as it prioritizes short-term expediency over long-term security, potentially leading to a recurrence of the issue or exploitation of other, unpatched vulnerabilities. Ignoring the vulnerability and relying solely on perimeter defenses is a dangerous oversight. Network functions are integral components of the infrastructure, and vulnerabilities within them can be exploited internally or through sophisticated external attacks that bypass perimeter controls. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of layered security and the importance of addressing vulnerabilities at their source. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured approach to vulnerability management. This involves 1. Accurate identification and assessment of the vulnerability. 2. Evaluation of potential remediation strategies, considering vendor advisories, patch notes, and impact assessments. 3. Development of a detailed implementation plan, including rollback procedures. 4. Phased deployment, starting with testing in isolated environments. 5. Post-implementation monitoring and verification. This systematic process ensures that security enhancements are implemented effectively and with minimal disruption to business operations. Question 7. Assessment of the most appropriate NSX security configuration strategy when a critical business application requires immediate deployment and has been identified as needing specific network connectivity to existing backend services, with the development team requesting broad network access to expedite testing. Option A. Grant the application subnet full network access to all other subnets within the data center to facilitate unrestricted testing and deployment. Option B. Create a single, broad NSX firewall rule that permits all inbound and outbound traffic for the application subnet to all destinations. Option C. Disable NSX firewall policies for the application segment temporarily until the application is fully deployed and stable. To avoid any potential connectivity issues during the initial rollout. Option D. Implement granular, NSX, distributed firewall rules to allow only the specific ports and protocols required for the application to communicate with its backend services, and segment the application into its own logical network segment. The correct answer is D. Implement granular NSX distributed firewall rules to allow only the specific ports and protocols required for the application to communicate with its backend services, and segment the application into its own logical network segment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security, where a new application deployment requires specific network access. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate business need for the application to function with the imperative to maintain a secure and compliant network posture. Rushing to grant broad access without proper vetting introduces significant risks, including potential data breaches, unauthorized access, and noncompliance with internal security policies and potentially external regulations, though this exam focuses on technical compliance within the NSX framework. The underlying principle of secure deployment is paramount. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise security. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured and documented process for evaluating and implementing the necessary network segmentation and firewall rules. This aligns with best practices for secure network design and operation, emphasizing the principle of least privilege. By defining specific network segments, applying granular NSX firewall policy, and documenting the rationale for each rule, the security team ensures that the application has only the necessary access to function, thereby minimizing the attack surface. This methodical approach also facilitates auditing and troubleshooting, ensuring ongoing compliance and security. Within the VMware NSX framework, this translates to leveraging microsegmentation and distributed firewall capabilities to enforce policy at the workload level, rather than relying on perimeter-based security alone. Incorrect approach is analysis. Granting broad network access to the entire segment where the new application is deployed is a significant security failure. This violates the principle of least privilege and creates an overly permissive environment, exposing other workloads in the segment to potential threats originating from or targeting the new application. It increases the blast radius of any security incident. Implementing a single, overly permissive firewall rule that allows all traffic from the application's subnet to all other subnets is equally problematic. This bypasses the granular control offered by NSX and creates a wide-open path for potential lateral movement by attackers. It fails to enforce microsegmentation and significantly increases the risk of unauthorized access and data exfiltration. Disabling security features or bypassing NSX firewall policies entirely to meet the deadline is a direct contravention of secure network deployment principles and would likely violate internal security policies and potentially audit requirements. This approach prioritizes speed over security and compliance, creating a critical vulnerability. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based approach to network security. When faced with new application deployments, the decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the application's functional requirements and its data sensitivity. 2. Identifying the specific network services and ports required for its operation. 3. Leveraging NSX capabilities, e.g., distributed firewall microsegmentation, to define granular security policies based on the principle of least privilege. 4. Documenting all policy decisions, including the business justification and security rationale. 5. Implementing and testing the policies thoroughly before granting production access. 6. Establishing a clear change management process for any subsequent modifications. This systematic approach ensures that security is integrated into the deployment lifecycle, rather than being an afterthought. Question 8. Comparative studies suggest that achieving consistent network security policy enforcement across hybrid and multi-cloud environments presents significant operational and security challenges. For an organization utilizing VMware NSX to manage its network virtualization and operating workloads in both AWS and Azure, what is the most effective approach to implement and manage distributed firewall rules across these disparate cloud platforms? Option A. Implement separate, native firewall solutions, e.g., AWS security groups, Azure network security groups, for each cloud environment and manage them independently. Option B. Manually configure firewall rules on each NSX edge node and distributed firewall instance within each cloud environment without a centralized management tool. Option C. Deploy and manage firewall rules solely through individual VM-level agents or host-based firewalls, orchestrated by a separate management tool. Option D. Utilize NSX Manager to define and enforce distributed firewall policies that are pushed to NSX components deployed within both AWS and Azure virtual networks. The correct answer is D. Utilize NSX Manager to define and enforce distributed firewall policies that are pushed to NSX components deployed within both AWS and Azure virtual networks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security architecture, where a critical security control, distributed firewalling, needs to be implemented across a multi-cloud environment. The professional challenge lies in ensuring consistent policy enforcement and operational visibility across disparate cloud platforms, AWS and Azure, while adhering to VMware NSX. X best practices and potential regulatory compliance requirements that might govern data residency and security posture. The complexity arises from the need to integrate NSX with native cloud constructs, manage different API sets, and maintain a unified security policy that is both effective and auditable. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves leveraging NSX's cross-cloud capabilities to deploy and manage distributed firewall rules centrally. This is best professional practice because NSX 4X is designed to provide a consistent security policy framework across heterogeneous environments. By using NSX Manager to define and push firewall rules to NSX edge nodes and distributed firewall components within both AWS and Azure Virtual Networks, the organization achieves unified policy management. This approach ensures that security policies are applied consistently regardless of the underlying cloud infrastructure, simplifying operations, reducing the risk of misconfiguration, and facilitating compliance audits. The ability to enforce microsegmentation and granular access controls across clouds is a core benefit of this architecture, directly addressing the need for robust security in a distributed environment. Correct approaches analysis. Implementing separate native firewall solutions for each cloud, AWS security groups and Azure network security groups, without a centralized management plane is professionally unacceptable. This approach leads to policy sprawl, increased operational overhead, and a higher likelihood of inconsistent security postures. It fails to provide a unified view of security across the entire infrastructure, making auditing and compliance extremely difficult. Furthermore, it negates the benefits of a platform like NSX, which is intended to abstract away underlying infrastructure complexities for security policy management. Attempting to manage firewall rules solely through individual VM-level agents or host-based firewalls, even if orchestrated, is also professionally unsound in this context. While host-based firewalls offer granular control, they do not provide the network-centric visibility and policy enforcement that distributed firewalls within NSX offer. This approach would be difficult to scale, manage consistently across a large number of VMs, and would not effectively address network segmentation at the workload level as intended by NSX. It also bypasses the integrated security features of NSX, such as threat intelligence integration and advanced threat prevention capabilities. Relying on manual configuration of firewall rules on each NSX edge node and distributed firewall instance within each cloud environment without a centralized management tool is a recipe for disaster. This method is highly prone to human error, leading to security gaps and compliance violations. It is not scalable, lacks auditability, and is antithetical to the principles of infrastructure as code and automated security management that modern network security architectures demand. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this scenario by first identifying the core requirement: consistent, centrally managed security policy across a multi-cloud environment. The decision-making process should prioritize solutions that offer unified management, automation, and visibility. This involves evaluating the capabilities of the chosen network virtualization platform, VMware NSX, and how it integrates with the target cloud providers. A thorough understanding of NSX's cross-cloud architecture and its policy enforcement mechanisms is crucial. When faced with such a challenge, professionals should ask, does this approach provide a single pane of glass for security policy management across all deployed cloud environments? And does it enable consistent enforcement of security controls and facilitate auditing? The answer to these questions will guide the selection of the most robust and compliant solution. Question 9. Market research demonstrates that organizations leveraging VMware NSX 4X in a cloud environment often struggle to demonstrate adherence to data protection regulations. When faced with an audit requiring proof of compliance for network traffic segmentation and access control, which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory expectations for demonstrating control over sensitive data within the NSX environment? Option A. Providing documentation of the NSX distributed firewall rules and security group configurations, along with evidence of regular audits of these policies against the organization's defined compliance framework. Option B. Relying on the default NSX security policies and assuming they meet all regulatory requirements for data protection without further verification or customization. Option C. Presenting a high-level overview of NSX's security features and capabilities without specific configuration details or audit logs related to the segmented network traffic. Option D. Submitting the cloud provider's compliance certifications and attestations, asserting that NSX is deployed within a compliant infrastructure. The correct answer is A. Providing documentation of the NSX distributed firewall rules and security group configurations, along with evidence of regular audits of these policies against the organization's defined compliance framework. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in cloud-native environments, ensuring regulatory compliance for network security configurations when leveraging a managed service like VMware NSX 4. The professional must balance the agility and scalability offered by NSX with the stringent requirements of data protection regulations. The core challenge lies in understanding the shared responsibility model in cloud deployments and how NSX's capabilities map to specific compliance obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the specific regulatory framework applicable to the organization's data, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, depending on the jurisdiction and data type. This necessitates a detailed review of NSX's security features, such as microsegmentation, distributed firewalling, intrusion detection/prevention, and encryption, and how they can be configured and audited to meet the defined compliance controls. The professional must then document these configurations and the rationale behind them, creating an auditable trail that demonstrates adherence to regulatory mandates. This proactive and documented approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses the how of compliance, providing concrete evidence to auditors and regulators. It aligns with the principle of accountability, ensuring that the organization can prove its commitment to data protection. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the cloud provider's compliance certifications automatically cover all aspects of the organization's network security posture within NSX. While cloud providers offer a secure infrastructure, the responsibility for configuring and managing the security of the workloads and network traffic within that infrastructure, using tools like NSX, typically remains with the customer. Relying solely on the provider's compliance without specific NSX configuration and auditing is a significant regulatory failure, as it neglects the organization's direct responsibilities. Another incorrect approach is to implement NSX security policies based solely on operational convenience or perceived best practices without mapping them to specific regulatory requirements. This can lead to gaps in compliance, where critical controls mandated by regulations are not implemented or are implemented ineffectively. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can result in non-compliance findings during audits. A third incorrect approach is to overlook the importance of continuous monitoring and auditing of NSX configurations. Compliance is not a one-time setup. It requires ongoing vigilance. Failing to regularly review and audit NSX security policies and logs means that misconfigurations or deviations from compliance standards could go unnoticed, leading to potential breaches and regulatory penalties. This failure to maintain an auditable and compliant state is a direct ethical and regulatory lapse. The professional decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying all applicable regulatory frameworks. 2. Understanding the specific compliance controls required by those frameworks. 3. Mapping NSX 4X features and configurations to meet those controls. 4. Implementing and documenting these configurations. 5. Establishing robust monitoring and auditing processes for continuous compliance. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating configurations based on evolving regulations and threat landscapes. Question 10. To address the challenge of deploying VMware NSX 4X microsegmentation capabilities while ensuring strict adherence to data protection regulations, which approach best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory compliance? Option A. Prioritize the rapid deployment of NSX microsegmentation features to gain competitive advantages, deferring detailed compliance checks to a post-implementation audit. Option B. Deploy NSX microsegmentation assuming existing security controls are sufficient, without a specific assessment of its impact on data protection mandates. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential impacts on data privacy and security controls, and then implement NSX with security policies that align with regulatory requirements, followed by ongoing monitoring. Option D. Implement NSX microsegmentation in a technically focused manner, without actively involving legal, compliance, or data privacy teams in the planning and deployment stages? The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential impacts on data privacy and security controls, and then implement NSX with security policies that align with regulatory requirements, followed by ongoing monitoring. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in regulated environments, balancing the need for rapid innovation and deployment of new technologies with the imperative to maintain compliance with established security and privacy regulations. Specifically, introducing advanced network virtualization features like NSX microsegmentation requires a thorough understanding of how these capabilities interact with existing data protection mandates. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the implementation of NSX does not inadvertently create new vulnerabilities or bypass existing controls designed to protect sensitive data, as defined by relevant regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves a proactive and integrated strategy. This means conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that specifically evaluates the impact of NSX microsegmentation on data privacy and security controls. This assessment should identify potential risks, such as misconfigurations leading to unauthorized access or data leakage, and define mitigation strategies. Implementing NSX with security policies that align with regulatory requirements, such as granular access controls and data flow monitoring, is paramount. This approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates due diligence, a commitment to regulatory adherence, and a risk-aware deployment methodology. It ensures that technological advancements are made within a secure and compliant framework, safeguarding both the organization and its stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to deploy NSX microsegmentation without a thorough assessment of its impact on data protection regulations. This could manifest as assuming existing security controls are sufficient or overlooking the specific data handling requirements stipulated by the regulatory framework. Such an approach carries significant regulatory and ethical risks. Failure to conduct a proper risk assessment could lead to violations of data privacy laws, resulting in substantial fines, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to protect sensitive information. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of deployment over compliance. This might involve implementing NSX features without adequately testing or validating their adherence to regulatory mandates, or deferring compliance checks to a later stage. This is professionally unacceptable as it prioritizes business objectives over legal and ethical obligations. It creates a high probability of noncompliance, which can have severe consequences. A third incorrect approach is to implement NSX in isolation, without involving legal, compliance, and data privacy teams in the design and deployment phases. This siloed approach can lead to blind spots regarding regulatory requirements and an incomplete understanding of how NSX features might impact data handling and protection. It demonstrates a lack of integrated governance and a failure to leverage the expertise necessary for comprehensive compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, risk-based methodology. This begins with clearly identifying all applicable regulatory requirements related to data protection and network security. Next, a thorough risk assessment should be performed, specifically analyzing how the proposed NSX implementation will affect compliance with these regulations. This assessment should involve cross-functional teams, including IT security, legal, and compliance. Based on the risk assessment, a remediation plan should be developed, outlining specific controls and configurations to ensure compliance. Finally, ongoing monitoring and auditing processes should be established to ensure continued adherence to regulatory standards after deployment. Question 11. Process analysis reveals a critical zero-day vulnerability has been publicly disclosed affecting a core component of the VMware NSX deployment. No immediate vendor patch is available, and the exploit is considered highly sophisticated. The security team needs to determine the most appropriate immediate course of action to mitigate potential risks to the production environment and sensitive data. Which of the following represents the most professional and effective approach? Option A. Apply a broad set of generic security hardening measures across the entire network infrastructure without specific analysis of the NSX vulnerability. Option B. Immediately disable the affected NSX component to prevent any possibility of exploitation, accepting the significant operational disruption. Option C. Wait for the vendor to release a patch, assuming that the sophistication of the exploit makes it unlikely to be widely weaponized in the short term. Option D. Conduct a detailed risk assessment to understand the specific exploitability and potential impact within the current NSX configuration, and implement targeted compensating controls while actively monitoring for vendor updates. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed risk assessment to understand the specific exploitability and potential impact within the current NSX configuration, and implement targeted compensating controls while actively monitoring for vendor updates. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security where a new, potentially high-impact vulnerability is discovered in a critical VMware NSX component. The professional must balance the urgency of addressing the vulnerability with the operational stability of the production environment. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the risk, understanding the potential impact of exploitation, and determining the most effective and least disruptive remediation strategy, all while adhering to established security policies and potentially regulatory compliance requirements for data protection and system availability. The absence of immediate vendor patches adds complexity, forcing a reliance on compensating controls and a thorough understanding of the NSX architecture. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted risk assessment that prioritizes understanding the exploitability and impact of the vulnerability within the specific NSX deployment. This includes analyzing the likelihood of exploitation based on public information and internal threat intelligence, and the potential impact on critical business functions, data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Implementing compensating controls, such as enhanced monitoring, stricter firewall rules, or microsegmentation adjustments, is a best practice when immediate patching is not feasible. This demonstrates proactive risk management by mitigating the threat without introducing further instability. This aligns with general cybersecurity principles of defense in depth and risk mitigation, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory frameworks mandating a secure operating environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. Ignoring the vulnerability due to the lack of an immediate patch is a severe regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates negligence and a disregard for the organization's security posture and the potential harm to data subjects or business operations. This directly contravenes the principle of due diligence in cybersecurity. Implementing a broad, untested set of security changes without a targeted risk assessment is also professionally unacceptable. Such an approach can lead to unintended consequences, operational disruptions, and the introduction of new vulnerabilities, potentially violating service-level agreements or compliance mandates related to system availability and performance. It lacks the precision required for effective risk management. Relying solely on vendor communication without independent verification or internal assessment is insufficient. While vendor advisories are crucial, a professional must understand how a vulnerability specifically impacts their unique environment and assess the effectiveness of proposed solutions or workarounds in that context. This can lead to a false sense of security and leave critical gaps unaddressed. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured risk assessment framework. This involves 1. Vulnerability identification and understanding. Deeply analyze the nature of the vulnerability and its potential attack vectors. 2. Impact assessment. Determine the business and technical consequences of exploitation. 3. Likelihood assessment. Evaluate the probability of the vulnerability being exploited in the current environment. 4. Risk prioritization. Rank risks based on impact and likelihood. 5. Control selection. Choose appropriate mitigation strategies, including compensating controls when patches are unavailable. 6. Monitoring and review. Continuously monitor the effectiveness of implemented controls and reassess risk as new information becomes available. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with organizational security objectives and regulatory expectations. Question 12. The control framework reveals that the current risk assessment process for the VMware NSX4 X deployment primarily focuses on identifying technical vulnerabilities through automated scanning tools, with limited consideration for the business impact or the likelihood of exploitation within the specific operational context. Which of the following approaches best addresses this deficiency and aligns with robust risk management principles for a professional NSX deployment? Option A. Develop a detailed inventory of all NSX components and their configurations, assuming that comprehensive documentation inherently mitigates risk. Option B. Increase the frequency of automated vulnerability scans and implement all identified security patches immediately to reduce the attack surface. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates technical vulnerability findings with business impact analysis, threat intelligence, and an evaluation of the likelihood of exploitation to prioritize mitigation efforts. Option D. Focus mitigation efforts on the most frequently reported vulnerabilities, regardless of their specific impact on critical business functions or their actual exploitability in the current environment. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates technical vulnerability findings with business impact analysis, threat intelligence, and an evaluation of the likelihood of exploitation to prioritize mitigation efforts. Explanation. The control framework reveals a critical gap in the organization's approach to risk assessment for its VMware NSX deployment. The challenge lies in balancing the need for robust security controls with operational agility and the potential for misinterpreting the scope and impact of identified risks. A common pitfall is to focus solely on technical vulnerabilities without adequately considering the business context and the likelihood of exploitation. This can lead to misallocation of resources, ineffective mitigation strategies, and ultimately, increased exposure to threats. The correct approach emphasizes a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates technical findings with business impact analysis and threat intelligence. This aligns with best practices in cybersecurity risk management, which advocate for a holistic view. By prioritizing risks based on their potential impact on critical business functions and the likelihood of occurrence, organizations can develop targeted and effective mitigation plans. This proactive and business-aligned approach ensures that security investments are directed towards the most significant threats, thereby enhancing overall resilience and compliance. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on automated vulnerability scans without contextualizing the findings. This fails to consider the exploitability of a vulnerability in the specific NSX environment and its potential impact on business operations. Such an approach can lead to a flood of low-priority alerts, diverting attention from genuine threats. Another incorrect approach is to implement generic security controls without a specific risk assessment to justify their necessity or effectiveness within the NSX context. This can result in unnecessary complexity, performance degradation, and a false sense of security. A third incorrect approach is to ignore risks that are perceived as low probability, even if their potential impact is high. This violates the principle of due diligence in risk management, as organizations must prepare for even unlikely but catastrophic events. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the business objectives and critical assets protected by the NSX deployment. This is followed by identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities specific to the NSX environment. Subsequently, the likelihood and impact of these risks must be assessed, considering both technical and business perspectives. Finally, mitigation strategies should be developed and prioritized based on the assessed risk levels, ensuring alignment with organizational risk appetite and regulatory requirements. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual spike in the volume of flow records being generated by a specific NSX edge node, exceeding the predefined threshold for normal operational traffic patterns. Option A. Disable the flow record volume alert on the NSX edge node to prevent further notifications. Option B. Immediately increase the logging verbosity on the NSX edge node to capture more detailed information about the traffic. Option C. Archive all historical flow records from the NSX edge node to reduce the immediate storage pressure. Option D. Review the NSX edge node's flow export configuration, including the enabled flow types and sampling rates, to identify any recent changes or misconfigurations that might explain the increased volume. The correct answer is D. Review the NSX edge node's flow export configuration, including the enabled flow types and sampling rates, to identify any recent changes or misconfigurations that might explain the increased volume. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for network visibility with the long-term implications of data retention and potential security risks. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting the implications of a specific monitoring output within the context of operational best practices and potential regulatory compliance, even if no explicit regulation is directly cited in the prompt. The professional must exercise judgment to determine the most appropriate course of action, considering the impact on security posture, resource utilization, and the ability to perform effective troubleshooting. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and risk-aware methodology. By initiating a review of the monitoring configuration and its associated data retention policies, the professional is proactively addressing the root cause of the alert. This aligns with principles of good network governance and operational hygiene, ensuring that monitoring tools are configured optimally and do not become a liability. This approach is ethically sound as it aims to maintain a secure and efficient network environment, which indirectly protects the integrity of data and services. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing the logging verbosity without understanding the implications of the current alert is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to an overwhelming volume of data, making it harder to identify genuine issues and increasing storage costs unnecessarily. It also fails to address the underlying reason for the alert, potentially masking a more significant problem. From a regulatory or ethical standpoint, this approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence in managing network resources and security. Another incorrect approach that involves immediately disabling the monitoring alert without investigation is also professionally unsound. This bypasses the opportunity to understand a potential anomaly or misconfiguration. It creates a blind spot in the network's observability, which could have serious security or operational consequences if the alert was indicative of a genuine issue. Ethically, this is a failure to uphold the responsibility of maintaining a secure and functional network. A third incorrect approach that involves archiving all historical logs without a clear purpose or retention policy is inefficient and potentially risky. While data archiving is important, doing so indiscriminately can lead to significant storage overhead and make it difficult to retrieve relevant information when needed for troubleshooting or forensic analysis. It also raises questions about compliance with data retention regulations if specific data types have defined lifecycle requirements. The professional reasoning process should involve 1. Understanding the alert. What is the monitoring system trying to communicate? 2. Assessing the impact. What are the potential consequences of this alert? 3. Investigating the root cause. Why is this alert being triggered? 4. Evaluating solutions. What are the most effective and efficient ways to address the root cause? 5. Considering long-term implications. How will the chosen solution affect network operations, security, and resource utilization? Question 14. Consider a scenario where a financial services organization is implementing VMware NSX 4X for network virtualization and security. They are tasked with designing a security policy for new micro-segmented application tier hosting sensitive customer data. The primary goal is to prevent unauthorized access and lateral movement of threats within this tier, while ensuring legitimate application traffic can flow. The organization operates under strict financial regulations that mandate robust data protection and auditability. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for this scenario? Option A. Configure a broad security policy that allows all inbound and outbound traffic for the application tier, with minimal restrictions, to ensure maximum application availability and performance. Option B. Implement a default deny security policy for all traffic within the application tier, and then explicitly define security rules to allow only the necessary communication flows between application components and authorized external services. Option C. Implement a default allow security policy for all traffic within the application tier, and then create specific deny rules to block known malicious traffic patterns and unauthorized access attempts. Option D. Focus primarily on securing the network perimeter of the data center where the application tier resides, assuming internal traffic within the NSX environment will be inherently secure. The correct answer is B. Implement a default deny security policy for all traffic within the application tier, and then explicitly define security rules to allow only the necessary communication flows between application components and authorized external services. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security architecture. balancing the need for robust security controls with the operational demands of a dynamic environment. The professional challenge lies in selecting an NSX security policy approach that is both effective in mitigating threats and manageable for ongoing operations, especially as the network evolves. A critical aspect is ensuring that the chosen approach aligns with the organization's security posture and compliance requirements, which are paramount in a regulated industry. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adopts a proactive, least privileged security model. By starting with a default deny policy and explicitly allowing necessary traffic, it minimizes the attack surface and ensures that only authorized communication can occur. This aligns with the principle of defense in depth and is a foundational element of secure network design, often mandated or strongly recommended by industry best practices and regulatory frameworks that emphasize preventing unauthorized access and data breaches. An incorrect approach that relies on a default allow policy with specific deny rules is professionally unacceptable. This is because it inherently permits all traffic by default, creating a much larger attack surface. If a new threat emerges or a misconfiguration occurs, unauthorized traffic could easily traverse the network before being identified and blocked. This approach fails to adhere to the principle of least privilege and significantly increases the risk of security incidents, which could lead to regulatory noncompliance, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on perimeter security without implementing microsegmentation within the data center is also professionally deficient. While perimeter security is important, it is insufficient in modern threat landscapes where threats can originate internally or bypass the perimeter. The failure to implement granular controls within the network leaves internal assets vulnerable to lateral movement by attackers, a critical oversight that regulatory bodies often scrutinize. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment, understanding the organization's threat model, and evaluating the operational overhead of different security strategies. Professionals must prioritize security principles like least privilege and defense in depth. They should consult relevant compliance mandates and industry best practices to inform their decisions. A phased implementation and continuous monitoring are also crucial to adapt to evolving threats and network changes, ensuring that security remains effective and manageable. Question 15. Comparative studies suggest that when deploying a new critical application requiring network connectivity across multiple security segments within a VMware NSX environment, the approach to defining NSX firewall rules significantly impacts the overall security posture. Given the application's need to communicate with specific backend services and external APIs, what is the most secure and professionally responsible method for configuring NSX firewall rules to meet these requirements while adhering to best practices for network segmentation and the principle of least privilege? Option A. Allow all traffic between the application segment and the existing trusted network segment to ensure seamless integration and avoid potential application issues. Option B. Implement a broad, allow any rule for the application's inbound traffic from the internet to simplify configuration and ensure connectivity. Option C. Define granular NSX firewall rules that explicitly permit only the necessary protocols and ports identified through application profiling and traffic analysis for both inbound and outbound communication, documenting the rationale for each rule. Option D. Create a single, overly broad NSX firewall rule that permits all traffic from the application segment to all other segments within the data center. The correct answer is C. Define granular NSX firewall rules that explicitly permit only the necessary protocols and ports identified through application profiling and traffic analysis for both inbound and outbound communication, documenting the rationale for each rule. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security architecture, where a new application's requirements for intersegment communication must be balanced against the principle of least privilege and the need to maintain a robust security posture. The challenge lies in accurately identifying the minimal set of network services and ports required for the application to function correctly, while preventing unauthorized access or lateral movement by potential threats. Overly permissive rules can create significant security gaps, while overly restrictive rules can lead to application malfunction, impacting business operations. The pressure to deploy quickly can exacerbate the risk of making suboptimal security decisions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, evidence-based method of defining the application's communication needs. This begins with thorough application profiling, understanding its dependencies, and identifying the specific protocols and ports it uses for internal and external communication. This information is then translated into granular NSX firewall rules that explicitly permit only these necessary traffic flows. This aligns with the principle of least privilege, a cornerstone of effective network security, and directly supports the security objectives mandated by frameworks that emphasize granular control and defense in depth. By documenting the rationale for each rule and regularly reviewing its necessity, the security team ensures ongoing compliance and minimizes the attack surface. Incorrect approach is analysis. Allowing all traffic between the application segment and the existing trusted network segment is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach violates the principle of least privilege, creating an unnecessarily large attack surface. If the application is compromised, an attacker could easily pivot to other systems within the trusted network, leading to a widespread breach. This is contrary to any responsible security framework that mandates segmentation and controlled access. Implementing a broad, allow any rule for the application's inbound traffic from the internet, without specific port and protocol restrictions, is another critical failure. This exposes the application to a vast array of potential attacks, including brute force attempts, exploit attempts on unpatched services, and denial of service attacks. It directly contravenes the security best practices and regulatory requirements that mandate the protection of internet-facing services through strict access controls. Creating a single, overly broad NSX firewall rule that permits all traffic from the application segment to all other segments within the data center is also professionally unacceptable. This negates the benefits of network segmentation, which is a key security control. It allows for unrestricted lateral movement, making it easier for threats to spread throughout the environment and increasing the potential impact of a security incident. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of fundamental network security principles and would likely be flagged during any security audit. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with this situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, engage with application owners and developers to gain a deep understanding of the application's functional communication requirements. Second, utilize network traffic analysis tools to observe actual traffic patterns during testing phases, validating theoretical requirements. Third, translate these findings into specific, granular NSX firewall rules, adhering strictly to the principle of least privilege. Fourth, document the justification for each rule and establish a regular review process to ensure continued relevance and security. Finally, prioritize security over expediency, understanding that a rushed, insecure deployment creates far greater long-term risks and potential regulatory liabilities. Question 16. Upon reviewing the network architecture for a multi-tier application deployed across multiple NSX segments in a VMware vSphere environment, a security architect identifies a potential gap in internal network segmentation. The current implementation allows broad communication between application tiers, relying primarily on perimeter firewall rules. The architect needs to propose a strategy to enhance internal security and meet compliance requirements for isolating sensitive data processing components. What is the most effective and compliant approach to implement granular network segmentation for this application? Option A. Implement distributed firewall rules based on application tier security groups, dynamically populated using VM tags, to enforce microsegmentation policies at the workload level. Option B. Configure a single, broad distributed firewall rule to permit all traffic between the application tiers, simplifying management and ensuring connectivity. Option C. Manually configure distributed firewall rules based on static IP addresses and specific VM assignments for each tier. Option D. Rely solely on existing perimeter firewall rules to control traffic flow, as internal segmentation is considered less critical in a virtualized environment. The correct answer is A. Implement distributed firewall rules based on application tier security groups, dynamically populated using VM tags, to enforce microsegmentation policies at the workload level. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in large-scale NSX deployments, ensuring consistent and secure network segmentation across a distributed environment without introducing unintended connectivity or security gaps. The challenge lies in balancing the need for rapid deployment and scalability with the imperative to adhere to strict security policies and compliance requirements. Misconfigurations can lead to significant security breaches, compliance violations, and operational disruptions, making meticulous planning and validation critical. The distributed nature of cloud environments and the dynamic allocation of resources further complicate this, requiring a robust and automated approach to policy enforcement. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves leveraging NSX's distributed firewall, DFW, capabilities to enforce microsegmentation policies directly at the virtual machine, VM, or workload level. This is best achieved by defining security groups based on application tiers, roles, or compliance requirements, and then applying DFW rules to these groups. Use of tags or metadata for dynamic group membership ensures that policies automatically adapt to changes in the environment, such as VM reboots, migrations, or scaling events. This method aligns with the principle of least privilege, minimizing the attack surface by allowing only necessary communication flows. It also facilitates compliance by providing granular control and auditability of network traffic. This approach is considered best professional practice as it is scalable, automated, and inherently secure, reducing the risk of human error during manual configuration. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that relies solely on traditional network firewalls at the perimeter of the virtual data center, without implementing microsegmentation within, fails to address the internal threat landscape. This creates a flat network internally, where a breach at one point can easily spread to other segments, violating the principle of defense in depth. It also makes it difficult to enforce granular compliance requirements for specific workloads. Implementing DFW rules based on static IP addresses or manual VM assignments is highly prone to errors and becomes unmanageable in dynamic environments. When VMs are added, removed, or IPs change, these rules become outdated, leading to either security gaps or blocked legitimate traffic. This manual approach is not scalable and increases the risk of misconfiguration, which can have severe regulatory and ethical implications, particularly concerning data protection and unauthorized access. Using a single, overly permissive DFW rule to allow all traffic between application tiers, with the intention of simplifying management, directly contradicts the principles of microsegmentation and least privilege. This creates a broad attack vector, making it easy for threats to move laterally within the application. Such an approach would likely fail compliance audits that require evidence of strict access controls and segmentation for sensitive data. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a proactive and policy-driven approach to network security. The decision-making process should prioritize understanding the application's communication requirements and the associated compliance mandates. This involves 1. Identifying critical assets and sensitive data. 2. Defining logical security zones based on application tiers, roles, or compliance needs. 3. Leveraging NSX's dynamic grouping mechanisms, tags, metadata for policy assignment. 4. Implementing the principle of least privilege through granular DFW rules. 5. Establishing a robust change management and validation process for all security policy modifications. 6. Regularly auditing firewall rules and network traffic to ensure ongoing compliance and security posture. Question 17. Compliance review shows that a global organization has deployed VMware NSX across multiple data centers, but there are concerns about the consistency and effectiveness of distributed firewall policies being enforced across all segments, particularly in regions with less experienced local network operations teams. The current deployment process involves a central team pushing policies, with limited localized validation before go-live. What is the most professionally sound approach to address these identified inconsistencies and ensure robust policy enforcement across the entire NSX environment? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for distributed firewall policy configuration and enforcement entirely to the local network operations teams in each region, providing them with the necessary NSX training and documentation. Option B. Focus on enhancing the central team's capacity to push policies more rapidly and develop advanced scripting to automate the deployment process, assuming that faster deployment will inherently lead to better consistency. Option C. Implement a phased rollout of the distributed firewall policies, starting with a pilot group of segments in a less critical region, followed by incremental expansion after successful validation and feedback incorporation. This approach includes automated pre- and post-implementation checks and integration with existing monitoring tools for continuous verification. Option D. Immediately push a standardized, highly restrictive distributed firewall policy to all NSX segments globally to ensure a baseline level of security, and then address any operational issues or exceptions as they arise. Correct answer is C. Implement a phased rollout of the distributed firewall policies, starting with a pilot group of segments in a less critical region, followed by incremental expansion after successful validation and feedback incorporation. This approach includes automated pre- and post-implementation checks and integration with existing monitoring tools for continuous verification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in large, distributed NSX environments where maintaining consistent security policy across diverse geographical locations and varying network infrastructures is paramount. The challenge lies in balancing the need for centralized control and visibility with the operational realities of localized network teams who may have different operational procedures, skill sets, and immediate priorities, ensuring that security policies are not only deployed, but also effectively enforced and auditable across all segments, without introducing unintended network disruptions or compliance gaps, requires meticulous planning and execution. The pressure to deliver new services quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts or deviations from established best practices, making a robust validation process critical. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a phased, risk-based rollout strategy coupled with comprehensive pre- and post-implementation validation. This aligns with best practices for change management and security deployment in complex environments. By starting with a pilot group and progressively expanding, potential issues can be identified and remediated in a controlled manner, minimizing the blast radius of any unforeseen problems. The inclusion of automated validation checks and integration with existing monitoring tools ensures that the deployed policies are functioning as intended and that any deviations are immediately flagged. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining compliance with security standards and internal governance, as it provides demonstrable evidence of policy enforcement and operational integrity. The focus on documentation and knowledge transfer also supports long-term maintainability and reduces reliance on specific individuals. Incorrect approaches analysis. A deploy and hope for the best approach, while seemingly faster, is professionally unacceptable due to its inherent risks. It bypasses critical validation steps, leaving the organization vulnerable to security breaches or operational outages if policies are misconfigured or conflict with existing infrastructure. This failure to adequately test and validate directly contravenes the principle of due diligence in security implementation and can lead to significant compliance failures if audits reveal inadequate controls. Implementing policies without considering the impact on existing network services or without a rollback plan is also a critical failure. This demonstrates a lack of foresight and risk assessment. In a production environment, such an approach can cause widespread service disruption, impacting business operations and potentially leading to financial losses and reputational damage. It also fails to meet the ethical obligation to ensure that security measures do not negatively impact the availability and integrity of essential services. Focusing solely on the technical deployment without engaging local network teams or providing adequate training is another significant flaw. This creates an operational disconnect, where policies might be technically deployed but not understood, managed, or troubleshot effectively by the teams responsible for the underlying infrastructure. This can lead to inconsistent enforcement, delayed incident response, and ultimately, a weakened security posture. It also represents a failure in collaborative best practices, which are essential for the successful adoption and maintenance of complex technologies like NSX. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with this challenge should adopt a structured, iterative approach. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the existing network architecture and security requirements across all relevant segments. 2. Developing a detailed implementation plan that includes phased rollouts, pilot testing, and clear rollback procedures. 3. establishing robust validation mechanisms, both automated and manual, to confirm policy correctness and operational impact. 4. Ensuring clear communication and collaboration with all affected teams, including comprehensive training and documentation. 5. Prioritizing risk assessment and mitigation at every stage of the implementation. This systematic process ensures that security objectives are met while minimizing operational disruption and maintaining a strong compliance posture. Question 18. Examination of the data shows that a large enterprise is experiencing inconsistent firewall rule enforcement across multiple NSX edge nodes responsible for segmenting different business units. The security team needs to implement a solution that ensures uniform application of firewall policies and simplifies ongoing management and auditing. What is the most effective approach to achieve this objective? Option A. Utilize NSX Manager to define and push all firewall rules to the NSX edge nodes, ensuring centralized policy management and distributed enforcement. Option B. Rely on third-party network management tools to synchronize firewall configurations across all NSX edge nodes. Option C. Develop custom scripts to deploy firewall configurations to each NSX edge node, bypassing NSX Manager's policy engine. Option D. Manually configure firewall rules directly on each individual NSX edge node via its command line interface. The correct answer is A. Utilize NSX Manager to define and push all firewall rules to the NSX edge nodes, ensuring centralized policy management and distributed enforcement. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in complex network environments, ensuring consistent and secure policy application across distributed NSX edge deployments. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for rapid deployment and configuration updates with the imperative to maintain security posture and compliance. Misconfigurations at the edge can have significant security implications, potentially exposing sensitive workloads or violating regulatory requirements. The chosen approach must demonstrate a deep understanding of NSX distributed architecture, policy propagation mechanisms, and the operational impact of configuration changes. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it leverages NSX's inherent capabilities for centralized policy management and distributed enforcement. By utilizing NSX Manager to define and push firewall rules, administrators ensure a single source of truth for security policies. This method minimizes the risk of configuration drift and ensures that security controls are applied uniformly across all edge nodes, regardless of their physical location or the workloads they protect. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, fundamental to robust network security, and often mandated by regulatory frameworks that require consistent application of security controls. An incorrect approach that involves manually configuring firewall rules directly on individual NSX edge nodes is professionally unacceptable. This method is prone to human error, leading to inconsistencies and potential security gaps. It directly violates the principle of centralized management, making auditing and troubleshooting significantly more difficult. From a regulatory perspective, this approach fails to demonstrate due diligence in maintaining a secure and auditable network environment. It increases the risk of non-compliance with security standards that require documented, consistent, and verifiable security controls. Another incorrect approach, relying solely on automated scripts that are not integrated with NSX Manager for policy deployment, also presents significant risks. While automation is valuable, if these scripts bypass NSX Manager's policy engine, they can lead to configurations that are not properly tracked, versioned, or validated by the NSX platform. This can result in a loss of visibility and control, making it difficult to ensure that the intended security policies are actually being enforced. This lack of centralized oversight and validation is a critical failure in maintaining a secure and compliant network infrastructure. The professional reasoning process for this situation should involve: first, understanding the core requirement consistent and secure firewall policy enforcement across distributed NSX edges. Second, evaluating available NSX features and best practices for policy management. Third, considering the operational overhead, auditability, and security implications of each potential approach. Finally, selecting the method that aligns with NSX's design principles for centralized policy and distributed enforcement, thereby ensuring security, compliance, and operational efficiency. Question 19. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for unauthorized lateral movement of threats within the virtualized environment due to a lack of granular network segmentation. As a VMware NSX professional, you are tasked with implementing a micro-segmentation strategy to mitigate this risk. Considering the need for both effective security and operational stability, which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for network security? Option A. Implement a comprehensive deny-all policy across all network segments, followed by a manual IP address-based process of opening specific ports and protocols for essential communication, documenting each change meticulously. Option B. Immediately configure a broad, allow all policy for all internal traffic to ensure no legitimate application communication is blocked, and then address specific security concerns as they arise through ad hoc rule creation. Option C. Leverage NSX's distributed firewall capabilities to define security groups based on application tiers and workload tags, and then apply dynamic, least privileged security policies that are automatically updated as workloads scale or change. Option D. Deploy a perimeter firewall at the edge of the virtual environment and rely on existing network segmentation to prevent internal threats, assuming micro-segmentation is an unnecessary complexity for the current threat model. The correct answer is A. Implement a comprehensive deny-all policy across all network segments, followed by a manual, IP address-based process of opening specific ports and protocols for essential communication, documenting each change meticulously. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in network security, balancing the need for granular access control with the operational overhead of managing complex security policies. The professional is tasked with implementing a micro-segmentation strategy using VMware NSX, which inherently involves defining numerous security policies to isolate workloads. The challenge lies in ensuring that these policies are not only effective in preventing lateral movement of threats, but also maintainable and auditable, especially in a dynamic environment. The risk assessment has highlighted potential vulnerabilities stemming from overly permissive firewall rules or misconfigurations that could be exploited. The correct approach involves a phased implementation of micro-segmentation, starting with a discovery and analysis phase to understand application communication flows. This is followed by a policy definition phase that leverages NSX's distributed firewall capabilities to enforce least privilege. The key here is to use a combination of security groups, tags, and application profiles to dynamically group workloads and apply policies, rather than relying on static IP addresses. This approach aligns with best practices for modern security architectures, emphasizing automation and dynamic policy management. It directly addresses the regulatory requirement for robust security controls and the ethical obligation to protect data by minimizing the attack surface. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a broad deny-all policy without understanding the application dependencies. This could lead to significant service disruptions and operational downtime, negating the security benefits. Such an approach fails to meet the professional standard of due diligence, as it does not involve a thorough analysis of the environment before imposing restrictive controls. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on manual configuration of firewall rules based on IP addresses. This is highly error-prone, difficult to scale, and makes auditing a nightmare, increasing the likelihood of misconfigurations that could lead to security breaches. This violates the principle of maintaining accurate and auditable security records, which is often a regulatory mandate. Furthermore, failing to leverage NSX's automation and dynamic policy features represents a missed opportunity to implement a more resilient and efficient security posture, potentially exposing the organization to risks that could have been mitigated. A professional decision-making process should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the application architecture and communication patterns through discovery tools. Second, define security policies based on the principle of least privilege, utilizing NSX's capabilities for dynamic grouping and policy enforcement. Third, implement policies in a phased manner, starting in a monitoring or logging mode to observe the impact before enforcing them. Finally, establish a robust change management and auditing process to ensure ongoing compliance and security effectiveness. This systematic methodology ensures that security controls are implemented effectively without compromising operational stability, and in adherence to regulatory and ethical standards. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a network administrator, while performing routine maintenance on a client's VMware NSX environment, has discovered a sophisticated vulnerability. Further investigation suggests this vulnerability could be exploited by a state-sponsored actor. The client, upon being informed of the potential risk, has instructed the administrator to take no action and to maintain absolute confidentiality. Citing concerns about reputational damage and potential loss of business, the administrator is aware that this vulnerability, if exploited, could have severe consequences beyond the immediate client. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action for the network administrator? Option A. Immediately report the vulnerability to the presumed government of the state-sponsored actor, bypassing internal reporting and client notification. Option B. Comply with the client's directive to take no action and maintain absolute confidentiality, prioritizing the client relationship and avoiding any potential negative repercussions. Option C. Independently attempt to remediate the vulnerability without informing the client or seeking authorization, believing this is the fastest way to secure the environment. Option D. Escalate the discovered vulnerability through internal channels. Consult with legal and compliance teams, and follow established protocols for reporting significant security threats to relevant authorities, while working with the client to mitigate the risk without compromising confidentiality unnecessarily. The correct answer is D. Escalate the discovered vulnerability through internal channels, consult with legal and compliance teams, and follow established protocols for reporting significant security threats to relevant authorities, while working with the client to mitigate the risk without compromising confidentiality unnecessarily. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain client confidentiality versus the imperative to comply with evolving regulatory requirements. The network administrator is privy to sensitive information about a client's network architecture and security posture. The discovery of a potential vulnerability that could be exploited by a state-sponsored actor introduces a heightened level of risk, not just to the client, but potentially to broader national security interests. The administrator must navigate the delicate balance between their contractual duty of confidentiality and their ethical and potentially legal responsibilities to report significant security threats, especially when the threat actor is identified as state-sponsored. This requires careful judgment to avoid overstepping boundaries while ensuring critical risks are addressed. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves escalating the discovered vulnerability through established internal channels and potentially to relevant regulatory bodies, while respecting client confidentiality as much as possible. This aligns with professional ethical codes that prioritize the prevention of harm and the responsible disclosure of significant security risks. In the context of VMware NSX Professional, this means adhering to best practices for incident response and vulnerability management, which typically include documented procedures for reporting and handling security incidents. The professional should consult their organization's incident response plan and legal counsel to determine the appropriate reporting mechanisms, ensuring that any disclosures are made in a manner that minimizes unnecessary exposure of client data, yet effectively communicates the threat. This approach upholds the principle of do no harm by proactively addressing a significant threat. Incorrect approach is analysis. Directly reporting the vulnerability to the state-sponsored actor's presumed government without internal consultation or client consent is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This action breaches client confidentiality, potentially violates contractual agreements, and could lead to unintended consequences or misinterpretations of the threat, bypasses established security protocols, and could be construed as unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. Ignoring the vulnerability due to the client's directive and the potential for reputational damage is also a critical failure. This approach prioritizes short-term business interests over the long-term security implications and ethical responsibilities. It neglects the duty to protect systems and data from known threats, potentially exposing the client and others to significant harm. This inaction could lead to severe regulatory penalties if a breach occurs and the prior knowledge of the vulnerability is discovered. Attempting to remediate the vulnerability independently without informing the client or seeking appropriate authorization is another problematic approach. While well-intentioned, This action could inadvertently cause network instability, disrupt critical services, or even introduce new vulnerabilities if not executed perfectly. It also bypasses the client's right to be informed about changes to their infrastructure and the risks associated with them, and it could violate contractual terms regarding system modifications. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes a structured and ethical response to security incidents. This involves 1. Understanding and adhering to organizational policies and procedures for incident response and vulnerability management. 2. Consulting with legal and compliance departments to ensure all actions are within regulatory and contractual boundaries. 3. Prioritizing the prevention of harm and the responsible disclosure of significant threats. 4. Maintaining client confidentiality to the greatest extent possible while fulfilling reporting obligations. 5. Documenting all actions taken and decisions made throughout the process. This systematic approach ensures that critical security issues are addressed effectively and ethically, safeguarding both the client and the broader digital ecosystem.